Welcome everyone to the School Transportation Nation podcast. This week's episode is brought to you by TransFinder, the leader in school bus routing software, and our tech tip is brought to you by Zonar. I am Tony Corcoran, the publisher of School Transportation News.
And I'm Ryan Gray, Editor-in-Chief at School Transportation News. Joining us a little bit later is Don Harkey of People Centric Consulting Group. He will be sharing a very timely message about keeping your staff motivated and engaged in these uncertain times.
Well, Ryan, I wanted to get right into it with you. There's no question that coronavirus has taken its toll on people's mental health. I know the people around me are definitely being affected as they're at the stay-at-home stage and just ready to be released back into the wild, getting back to work. Wanted to discuss today with you, reflecting back on what's going on in the school transportation industry, maybe some tips to combat that.
Yeah, well, right now, obviously, a lot of states are on the precipice of reopening. Some are a little bit further along than others. We know that with that reopening, a lot of people are on one side of the fence or the other. They're either super excited or they have a lot of anxiety. And a lot of that has to do with their age and their susceptibility to contracting COVID-19. Well, in the school bus industry, there's a lot of anxiety right now about what's next. And we've been talking about this for a couple months now, and no one still really knows. Slowly but surely, though, we are seeing some guidance starting to trickle out. We discussed previously about this new STARTS task force that NAPT, NASDIPS, and NSTA launched last week, actually. So we'll be providing some more input on that and relaying what's going on with those first meetings on our website, stnonline.com. So be sure to check that out. We also saw the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, followed up on a flow chart that they issued a couple of weeks ago on should schools reopen. And they gave a list of criteria of hitting certain milestones before they could proceed to the next phase of trying to reopen. And with this larger document that they issued last week, they did mention school buses. And the recommendation that really stood out was one student per seat skipping every other row. So this is right to the crux of physical distancing that we've been talking about, and all of our readers trying to calculate based upon what type and model of bus they have and what the passenger capacity is. What would this look like? Well, this gives a little bit more information or detail to help with those decisions, and it's not popular. Judging by some of the initial comments on our Facebook page to an article we posted last week, school bus drivers and student transportation professionals in general are shaking their heads in disbelief, saying, how are we going to do this? I think that what it's proven is people's worst nightmares are starting to come true. Now, it's important to note that the CDC recommendations are just that. But over and over again, as we're talking to people, they've been telling us, we're waiting to see what the CDC says. We want to see, of course, what the states say, and the states are certainly looking at what the CDC is saying too. So we know that several states, most states are working right now on guidance. We know California is doing that. They're hoping to issue some guidance in June. Maryland this month released some draft guidance, as did Ohio. Texas is starting to get some information out there. So still a lot unknown. And that's really affecting a lot of professionals in this industry. As we've discussed before, there's a lot of older folks in this industry who are school bus drivers or in management, whatever, even working in dealers or different vendors. And they're all extremely worried about what this new normal is going to look like, as all these states are talking about reopening this summer. What's that look like? Do those folks still have to stay physically distanced at home? We just don't know yet. So certainly the mental health aspect is really draining on a lot of the employees in this industry, as it is across society. And we've also seen, obviously, there's mental health issues that have been coming to light more with our students, with the whole stay at home and losing their stability of the normal school day. So there's a lot of frustration still, a lot of anxiety, and it'll be really interesting to see what this industry task force comes out with.
Yeah, Ryan. I mean, student transporters continue to roll with the punches, awaiting direction, right? I mean, that's what we're hearing day in and day out. I was on a webinar recently that was talking a lot about leveraging technology, and I had asked the director who was on the webinar about, what was their use, how are they going to leverage it, and they kept basically saying they're waiting for direction from the state governor, how and what they're going to share with the families and how to move forward. So those are things that I think everybody needs to address now. We can't wait and see. We got to, run those scenarios, really kind of do the best we can to provide the tools for our teams to succeed. Providing the tools is really important. Today's tech tip is brought to you by Zonar, a leader in smart fleet management. The new norm will look different, but school buses will still need to be healthy. Drivers, fleet managers, shop techs, hand authorized users the digital tools to get buses ready to run routes again. Set them up with the free Zonar OTA app so they can update Cummins engines over the air in minutes using their smartphone or tablet. No downtime, no mechanics. Learn more at zonarsystems.com/restart. That's zonarsystems.com/restart. So, Ryan, what's this kind of all mean for school startup? How do people get ready? What's that next step that people need to consider taking?
Well, really, and Don Harkey's going to talk more about this in a few minutes. Communication, you were just touching on that, Tony. A lot of districts are wondering, like you said, you were there waiting on direction. Well, minus that direction, they need to be transparent with their parents, with their customers, with the students, and with their administrations, their superintendents. They need to be proactive, and they need to be sharing the data that they have at their hands so far. And again, we don't know what we don't know, but all these districts, nationwide are telling us that they've been doing scenario planning, and they're trying to wrap their heads around every sort of issue that they can conjure up. So they need to be maybe not sharing the doomsday with the parents, but I think with them, they have an opportunity right now to be sending out emails, phone calls as they can, whatever that preferred medium of communication the district has, social media, to reach out and say, hey, we're here. We care about you guys. We're ramping up for potential return to class in the fall. We don't know yet, just like you don't know yet what's going on in your lives, but we're doing the best we can because we care about you. We care about your children, and we want to provide you the information that we have so far. And then they can fill in the blanks. It might just be a message that says, hey, we're hearing about you, and here's the transportation director's email or phone number to call, here's a social media page that you can post on your concerns, just to open up those lines of communication, to engage the parents and tell them, hey, we care. We want to hear from you. What are your concerns? We're working on plans right now. Maybe we can assuage some of those fears that you have. So I think that's definitely something that student transporters can do right now. And that would make a huge world of difference in their communities. And also too, as I mentioned, they can be proactive and really engage the different departments in their district. If they're a bus company and they're still getting paid, which we've talked a lot about, that they can still keep those lines of communication open with the district and share what some of the potential costs are, right? Because we're seeing a lot of anxiety again about what would school busing and routing look like, back to those CDC guidelines of spacing the kids out to every other seat. We actually have a blog that we put up last week by John Haney, who is the retired transportation director from North Little Rock School District in Arkansas. And he ran some calculations and said, if you're looking at doing all of these split schedules and multiple tiered routing to get kids back and forth, if you're only able to get a fraction of the kids on the bus that you used to, say you have 50 buses in your fleet, and these changes would require basically you to triple the size of your fleet to 150 buses, which school districts right away will say, no way we can do that. But just for argument's sake, the drivers that you would also need to fill all those routes. And of course, the industry's been hammered by this driver shortage for the last several years. And really all signs are, despite the most optimistic commentary by some people. This whole COVID-19 thing really has the chance of really making the driver shortage worse, because so many drivers are now questioning, do they want to continue doing this job? They don't get paid very well. They are worried about their health. So, John came up with a calculation of factoring in all those new salary costs for drivers and the fleet and the equipment of $11.5 million. And again, for 50 buses to 150. No district has that money. I don't care who you are. So, it's sharing those kind of numbers as superintendents and school boards go to transportation with all these what if scenarios. Engage your staff to crunch those numbers and provide that information. And that's back to what the task force that NAPT, NASDIPS, and NSTA, along with the American School Bus Council, is doing, is they want to be the experts, and they are the experts, but they want to get that expert information out there so that superintendents, mayors, governors, whomever, legislators don't get up in front of the camera and say, oh, we'll just do this, nonchalantly, when they're really painting all their school districts into a corner.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's just so much going on. And I really think that there's a lot of heroes out there, Ryan. And a lot of these people are taking chances, like you said. And do they want to? And, we've brought it up a few times, but typically your school bus drivers can be on the older side of the age bracket, which puts them into that kind of at-risk population. And a lot of people are kind of questioning, like you said, should I go back? I was talking to someone earlier about the plexiglass box that, drivers could go into. They call them driver shields, right? So kind of a nice name. But what's that look like? What kind of mental impact does that have on the kids looking at their driver behind a plastic shield? There's just got to be more impact there that's being talked about. There's the health impact, but the mental impact, I don't know. To me, those are just steps that people are just looking at all these potential what ifs. The scenario about the seats, right? That to me also, how is that viable, right? Like if you're going to have to double the size of your fleet or run double the amount of routes and the cost impact to that. It's just, there's so many things. And, we always get talk about budgets like, hey, how much is someone going to cut their budget? Is it 1% to 10%? Is it more than that? I think people are just bracing for what that's going to look like. I know Texas came out, the governor said, hey, anticipate budget cuts, but schools and safety are going to be exempt from those budget cuts. So the hope is maybe schools will be shielded from some of these governmental mandates to cut their budgets. Maybe some of the other segments are going to get impacted at the state level, but schools may be shielded and protected from some of those impacts. But, Ryan, I think it's very interesting to see where we go. You want to share a little bit more about the HEROES Act and where that's heading, maybe even more about the updates on the PPP?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, there's about, a zillion HEROES Act pieces of legislation out there right now in Congress. But the one that a lot of our readers and listeners were very attuned to is this HEROES Fund, where Congress is trying to recognize and incentivize all the frontline essential workers. And they're talking about transportation people, obviously first responders, medical, and what NSTA has been trying to do is get school bus drivers into that and recognized. This is still ongoing, and this HEROES Fund will likely be a part of this coronavirus stimulus 4 that the Senate is currently deliberating on. We'll have to wait and see, but certainly there was some good potential news in the CDC document that was released that I mentioned last week, where it did mention transportation workers and bus. It mentioned transit, but certainly that gives an opening of the door to the school bus industry to get their foot in there. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. But yes, you mentioned PPP. So that first round of funding went out last month. A lot of businesses got it, some didn't. And there were some challenges, shall we say, that arose from that. Like any new program that was hastily put together, certainly as people saw it, the rubber hit the road, they saw some challenges with that and some issues. So right now, Congress has a PPP Flexibility Act that is in play. It's being fast-tracked for the House this week after the Senate passed their version last week. So we'll see here after Memorial Day what happens, what transpires. But we should be hearing something soon. But basically, it allows forgiveness of expenses beyond that 8-week covered period. So the whole point of this thing is to give businesses, and this is not really for school districts, but certainly for the contractors and all the different vendors out there. And this is a small business administration program, by the way. Basically extends the timeline for the forgiveness if they're using 75% of their funds for employee wages. That's really what it's designed to do, is to give a safety net to these companies so they can continue to pay their employees, continue to operate. So we're just seeing them looking at a lot of specific information in that program just to try to make it affect positively more people.
Yeah, I mean, that's really important for a lot of the small businesses that support the school districts with products and services. That's the backbone of this country, right? And I think programs like that are just so important. You know, it's like kids on school buses, peanut butter and jelly. They just go together. It's a classic, right? I want to say a few words from our sponsor, TransFinder, a leader in school bus routing software and logistics. TransFinder is announcing how two of their newest and most powerful solutions go great together, just like peanut butter and jelly, kids on school buses. TransFinder's new routing solution, Route Finder Plus, is powerful web-based solution that creates optimal routes with the click of a button. And TransFinder's parent app, Stop Finder Geo Alerts, works seamlessly with Plus. Plus and Stop Finder go together like peanut butter and jelly. Let's not forget the TransFinder challenge. TransFinder will donate $10 for every email it receives at getplus@transfinder.com. If you're seeking information on Plus, make sure you reach out and put together in the subject line, and TransFinder will make that donation to the charity of our choice. Folks, make TransFinder put their money where their mouth is. The email again is getplus@transfinder.com. Remember to put together in the email subject line. Next up, we have Don Harkey and Ryan Gray coming up. But before that, I have a special announcement to make. STN Expo Reno has been officially rescheduled to August 29th to September 2nd. Due to the coronavirus and all the uncertainty, we had to make the decision to move the show. We did a big poll of our readership and asked the question, and overwhelmingly people said to go with the new dates, and that's what we're going to do. I know it's close to school start, and unfortunately that's the only option we have, but we want to support you, give you that best content and also the training that you guys need for your districts and companies. So go to stnexpo.com for more information. Next up, Don Harkey, Ryan Gray. Stay tuned.
And we're back. Many of you have seen our next guest at STN Expo Reno or STN Expo Indianapolis. We are happy to be joined once again by Mr. Don Harkey, ladies and gentlemen.
Hey, Ryan.
How you doing?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
Awesome. So thanks so much for coming back and sharing your wisdom with us. So Don is the proprietor of People-Centric Consulting Group in Missouri and has been working with us for several years now. And we want to dig into some hot topics with you. And really your focus is on how to help organizations develop positive employee culture. And you've said in the past that it's not just about offering ping pong and barbecue, though our readers and listeners love that. But certainly pay continues to be very important, especially in this time of high unemployment. We have thousands of school bus drivers nationwide who have been laid off or furloughed or had their hours drastically reduced. So amid all this, amid the school closures and all the anxiety that comes with this COVID-19, how can school districts and bus companies with high employee engagement strike a balance between offering that positive employee culture and then also making sure that their folks are getting taken care of?
That's a great question, and that's loaded. That's a lot there. And just for the record, I am not on the anti-barbecue front or anti-ping pong front. So we have not taken that position. I think a lot of times just when we think about our culture, sometimes we think about the softer aspects of our culture. So we always advocate for systems that create the higher aspects of the culture, which are really engagement. You know, it's the empowering the individuals, but also balancing that with alignment for the team. And right now, with the challenges that a lot of organizations and transportation companies especially are dealing with, there's some real challenges out there. And I think that, there are a couple of things. Is one, when you talked about pay, first of all, people who are furloughed and what's the impact on that for employee motivation or engagement. You probably heard of Maslow's hierarchy, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a pyramid of needs. And on the bottom of that pyramid, near the bottom is just safety and pay and things like that. And near the top of it is more of the things like self-actualization, like the high-level engagement. So if an employee is really worried about their health or safety, or they're worried about their pay, they're probably not going to be thinking that much about being engaged at work. So short term, I think as a leader, you just have to give people a little bit of grace around that. You have to give them some understanding. Longer term, what we're seeing for the folks that are still with companies is actually we're seeing some culture boosts from a lot of teams that we work with. And it's around several things. One is this crisis has required teams to communicate more deliberately with each other, which is really good for culture. So they're having to be more deliberate about how they talk with each other, working remotely, how they communicate, what they communicate, those types of things. They're also very mission driven right now. They have a common enemy. So they're working against that common enemy together. I think that also what you're seeing is management is having to check in more with employees, and they're spending more time with the people that work for them, which is also good in terms of caring about your employees as people. So we're actually seeing some boosts in some cultures. I think the key here is, as things go back to whatever the new normal looks like, what lessons have you learned through this crisis? Which is tricky because we want to go back to normal, but at the same time, while this has been very incredibly disruptive, you just ran an experiment and you probably learned some things from that experiment. So we're encouraging all organizations, as painful as this experiment has been, and as much as we would never have chosen this way of doing things, let's look for some of the opportunities that are involved in it. Look for what we learned from this. Another way of saying this is culture is a series of habits, and your habits have been heavily disrupted. There's never been a better time to boost your culture by shifting some of your habits.
Along those lines, because you were talking about communication, and I was segueing right into what I wanted to ask you next, but also with opportunities and lessons learned. So with communication, obviously with this new era that we're in, those communication mediums have changed. What challenges, considering that organizations, they may have a good metered approach to communication, a good way of delivering and a good cadence, but have you seen anything out there of how now going to Zoom meeting or meeting those expectations has perhaps thrown out some new challenges, but as well as opportunities?
Yeah, and I think it has definitely been both. First of all, let's be honest. A Zoom meeting is not the same as meeting in person. You don't get the same experience. And it goes back to how we are as humans, how we're hardwired. We're hardwired for contact with each other. When we shake hands, see somebody live, we feel better about ourselves. It actually helps us to feel like we're part of a community. When you're on a Zoom call, you get some of that effect, but you don't get all of that effect with each other. The good thing that I think is going to happen from it, though, is that through the course of a typical day, we might do a lot of phone calls or a lot of emails. I think I've seen a lot of teams that are more willing to do more informal type video calls when they can't be together. And that in some ways will really improve communication. Email is such a monotone form of communication. You can't tell inflections on an email. I mean, no matter how many different bold fonts or sizes you use or colors, whatever, it's hard to convey a true meaning in an email. But in a Zoom call, you can watch each other. You can see expressions. You can see all those other forms of communication, the nonverbals that come across. So I think it's done two things. One is, I've heard some people say, I never want to be on another Zoom call again. I think that's a big mistake. I think using that form, using that media is going to be good for us overall. The other thing I've seen also in communication world is the expansion of tools like Microsoft Teams or Slack. We've started utilizing that as a team, and we have reduced our internal emails dramatically. Those types of tools are just a different way of thinking about how you communicate in a team, and it puts things into context. They're very, very efficient. So I think this crisis has created an opportunity for us to learn more about those types of communication to help us be more efficient and effective as we talk to each other. But it's not replacing us being live with each other. So when we can be live and talk with each other in person, that's going to be good.
We've seen something similar. It's like when someone does email you, it's like, oh, no, Teams me. Send that to me in Teams. And we've been using Teams for a while. Do you think that going forward, do you think that this is just going to all go away? Or do you think we're going to continue to use the different chat mechanisms out there, Zoom, GoToWebinar, GoToMeeting, all these different tools?
Let me put it this way. My mother-in-law is 75 years old, and she has taught piano lessons out of her house for probably 50 years now. She is not an early adopter of technology. She has an old flip phone that she uses. We just got her first laptop not too long ago. During this COVID crisis, she started teaching piano lessons online remotely with students. And she at first hated the idea that she had to do it, but she literally had to do it, right? That's the only way she could keep those students. But as she started doing it through Skype, she started realizing like, hey, this isn't so bad. So I think a lot of us, I think it's going to stick, not completely, not in exactly the same way we're doing it now, but I think we have learned something. And I think that some of the resistors of technology are going to become now adopters of it because they saw that it can work and you can communicate effectively with the team. And even in the day-to-day noise, like most of us aren't sitting together all the time, but if there's an opportunity to reduce ineffective meetings that we have in the office, or to reduce the number or quantity of emails that we have and put communication into a context, or when you're having difficult conversations and you can't be together, instead of just trying to listen for voice inflections to be able to watch each other, I think that's something that'll stick. I hope it sticks. I think it's been a good thing.
I wanted to get back to the talk about anxiety and stress a little bit more here as we close out. Obviously, you discussed the key in communication, but can you talk also too about what you are seeing in terms of organizational recovery plans? We see obviously a lot of anxiety in our world dependent upon what are we going to do next? How are we going to have the school buses running? They're getting all these pressures maybe from the mayor, the city, the school district administration, the superintendent about, okay, we need to do this. What are you seeing in terms of how organizations are writing this out and trying to plan for the next steps?
So I think a lot of organizations are really behind right now in recovery planning process. I think that the reason might be because two things. One is I think people just don't like to look at it because it's scary. You might have to make some unpleasant decisions. And the other thing is I think people are saying, how do I plan for the unknowable? We don't know what's going to happen next. So we have to wait and see what's going to happen. And I think that's a big mistake. So when we work with organizations to do recovery planning, and I was working with one today, what we do is it's a 3-step process. The first step is contingency planning. And contingency planning, the goal of that is to protect your organization. And the way you do that is you look at the impacted business functions that you might have through the crisis. So the ones that are impacted now and the ones that might be impacted later. And you start to plan around it. What things can we do now to control that? What things can we do to mitigate? And then you also put into place, if this happens, then we could trigger this. So that way you don't have to predict the future. So if our revenue drops another 10%, or if our cash position drops to this, then we'll do this, this, and this. And so you have plans in place for things that haven't happened yet. Once you do that contingency planning and you have it on paper and you know what you need to do, what we see is then organizations are able to get, it doesn't eliminate the fear, but it gets you past it. Now what you can start to do is you can start to look for the hidden opportunities that are out there. Nobody would have selected this crisis. Nobody wanted this virus. It's been a terrible thing for everybody. But having said that, a good friend of mine said, never waste a good crisis. There are opportunities that are out there for your organization, believe it or not, both internally and externally. And so that leads us into the second phase of recovery planning, which we call value needs planning. And value needs planning starts off by looking at what value do you provide for your customers? What's the core values that you provide for your customers? And then it goes into talking to your customers and finding out how they've been disrupted, just listening to them, not trying to sell them anything, but just listening to them. From those two things, you're taking what your value is and you're looking at their needs and you're going to look for where they intersect. They may intersect in old ways or they may intersect in new ways. And that might give you some ways to be able to innovate and find some new channels for delivering your product to your customer. There may be some opportunities for you to do things that you weren't able to do before because of the new situation. Then the third part is how do you mobilize your team and get them involved in it? And for that, we recommend what we call a crisis core team. We've been working with lots of organizations, including yours, to implement a core team process where ideas are brought to a team once a month and the team discusses it. It's a cross-functional team and they vet those ideas, prioritize them, and then they launch projects we call step teams to take action on them. During a crisis, we recommend that companies accelerate that process. They do it every other week or even every week. And what you're doing is you meet for 1 hour every week or every other week, and you're saying, what are the most important next things that we need to work on? And you're spinning off opportunities for your team to get engaged. What this does does is it helps you to create a place for you to change yourself, for you to innovate, for you to think and to move nimbly forward. Without that, your organization is just going to try to do what it used to do. And it's a different time. And so you have to design yourself to be able to move. So that's the recovery planning process we have. You start with contingency planning, you get into the value needs planning so you can innovate, and then you mobilize your team through a crisis core team.
Great recommendations there. Some actionable items that I hope our listeners take away from this conversation and implement immediately. So, Don, I understand that you have your recovering planning toolkit available to our listeners. Can you tell us about where they can access that?
Yeah, anyone who wants some help in walking through that recovery planning process can go visit our website at peoplecentric.com. And if anybody has any questions, please reach out to me, Don Harkey at peopleccg.com. Happy to help anybody who needs some help in walking through that process. I think it's just really important to go through it right now. You've got to get past this fear part and just waiting. We need to get into the action phase of what are we going to do next? How can we innovate? How can we really find new ways to be able to serve our customers ultimately at the end of the day?
Don, you're a gentleman and a scholar. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
I appreciate you all. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
And you stay safe and sane and your family, and say hi to all your team for us as well.
We will work to stay safe. I don't know about the sane part, but really, we'll do our best.
There you go. That's all you can do. Thanks so much.
Great thoughts, Ryan and Don. Really appreciate an excellent discussion. We'd love to hear how you're motivating your staff during these difficult times. Send your thoughts to info@stnonline.com. Special thanks to our sponsors, TransFinder and Zonar. Make sure to subscribe, stream, and download the School Transportation Nation podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Share it with friends on social media. Also, be sure to visit stnonline.com for our coronavirus coverage and everything having to do with school transportation. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.